Hello YouTube and hello Conference Report. So I've been thinking about the two video responses that you posted, as well as the previous videos in this exchange, and there's something that's really essential here about through maybe 5 or 6 short videos. We've touched on the internet as a change in history, as a change in how people associate, how people relate to authority, and what authority is, probably, etc. And what I want to say is that all of these changes, in effect, it might not be too dramatic to say that there's something like a change in being, if you like, or a change in subjectivity itself that's taking place, and how subjectivity is constructed in a network of relationships to things like, again, authority and association and history, etc. I want to say that the particularly in talking about things like authority and property, and political power and economic power, and then I think also that it might be fair to say that there's a change in the religious, what the conception of what religion is, particularly with the rise of sort of internet atheism, right? So the religious, the political, and the economic, which have always sort of been traditionally conceived of as the three axes on which the human subject realizes itself. Our relationship to all three of those change at a basic level, and as a result we change on a basic level. The poles by which we define ourselves changes at a really basic level. Again, Foucault has this great line where he says, man was invented in the 16th century. And what he means there, of course, is that man as an object of study was invented in the 16th century. The notion of human sciences was sort of called into being at this time. Man as such, right? And that, what I want to say is that's changed. There's something, we are in, not in this sort of technocratic or like cyberpunk sense, but we are in some real existential sense, talking about kind of a post-human situation, that the internet brings into being, and this is why I think someone like Baudrillard is so important, because I think he was very much thinking ahead of his time, and he was saying a lot of things that sort of seemed crazy that nowadays kind of ring a little bit more true than any of us would really like to admit, right? Particularly in talking about and you mentioned, the disappearance of the real, the disappearance of the subject, the disappearance of the social, and he was conceiving of these things as a disappearance. And he thought of himself, as a post-apocalyptic writer in a certain way. I think that's true and false at the same time, kind of. I think that there's something like um, the, there is, when you really begin to unpack all of the effects that the internet has and all of the different places where the internet touches, and how it redefines all these different discourses and our relationship to those discourses. I think what we see is that um, there's a dramatic and really basic refiguring of subjectivity that's happening, and that of course calls for if that's true, if that basic premise is true, that there's something fundamental about the human subject that's destabilized with the internet, or being re-articulated with the rise of the internet, then then this calls for new new ethics, new political structures, and new economic relations. Um, it seems that there's something quixotic about all of our discourse, or all of, let's say, the mainstream, which is a word that I don't like using, but the mainstream discourse of politics, ethics, and economics. Um, I want to say that there's something that is uh, impossible, right? About the forms with which we conceive of those issues, right? There's something, in some way. What I want to suggest is, maybe if I could concretize this just a little bit, maybe I could risk the hypothesis that with the 2008 financial collapse, what we really saw were the limits of financial capitalism as such. And what we're seeing now, economically speaking, where at least some of the new sort of dynamism of the economy is emerging, is in lots of like crowdsourced like tech startups and stuff like that. Um, and of course, tech and health were the two sectors of the economy that weren't really affected too dramatically by the economic collapse. And it seems like there's a kind of economic paradigm shift that's happening into kind of a post-financial technological something, right? I'm really hesitant to apply the word capitalism to small crowdsourced startups. I it's to apply the word capitalism there, you end up getting put into the old question of, if you have a boat, and over the years, you change out a plank, you know and you repair this and repair that, and then by the end of a certain amount of time, the boat has none of the same parts. Is it still the same boat? So I think that calling what we're entering, or what's really coming to define our economic frontier, calling that capitalism, runs into that problem. I think that this is another thing that we need a new language to describe. It's been a really long time since Marxian analysis ran up against the limits of itself, and you see it try to be extended out in the Frankfurt School with varying degrees of success. And Guy Debord, who you mentioned, or who I think I mentioned, and then you talked about as well, and Baudrillard as well, sort of carrying out something like a Marxian analysis. You see these analytic tools being sort of pushed out to their limits, But what I want to say is that our politics and our ethics and our economics are all built on a sort of classical notion of subjectivity, which is itself being called into question. Um, and this might sound like a postmodern point, but I would say that um, what I'm trying to get at is much more corporeal, almost, much more immediate and real, insofar as that word is meaningful here. Um, Much more like lived experience. We're not in some philosophical dreamland that uh, the postmodernists sort of were could be charged of inhabiting. We're not in that world anymore. Uh, this is something that is going to have to be thought about. What does politics mean given this new constellation of relations that forms the subject? And then you also talk about the we, right, the novel, and this idea. And you also in a previous video talked about things like revenge porn sites and stuff like that. I have this the world that we might be entering might be different in the following way. It's very possible that given this sort of hyper aggregating, um, uh, never going away, history never going away, all of that, and everything being documented, it's quite possible that um, the next generation of kids, once they get to a certain age, will be totally used to seeing their friends naked on the internet. You know what I mean? Like, people might uh, um, so the norms surrounding privacy are going to change, I want to say. It's what is conceived of as the private, is going to have to change as well, very much. And also, our bar for what, our sort of ideological bar for what, not even, I don't even want to say a good person, but maybe we could even say an electable person or a hireable person. That, what constitutes that is going to necessarily change as well. If all of our records and all sorts of things that we don't want everybody to see are all of a sudden visible to everybody, then all of a sudden everybody's in a situation where they are they're running for office, and there are videos of them like vomiting and in college while too drunk, and there's a sex tape of them somewhere, and there's all of this dirt that will exist around all sort of presidential candidates and potential hirees and stuff like that. So there has to be a change around our ideology of what a a decent person is, right? And what that means in relation to status. All of that has to change, almost by demand, right? I don't necessarily want to say that it's necessarily true that there will come a time where everybody has a sex tape online, but that might be hyperbolic. But it seems to me to be not that unthinkable, right? It seems to me to be not that crazy to realize that our norms of propriety are going to change, as well as everything else. Uh, I don't know. There is, and you mentioned that I use a lot of violent language when talking about these things, and I think it has to be. I think that I think it's what 1993 that the World Wide Web sort of came into being. I think that that represents a violent moment in history. The history kind of rends itself at that moment, and not to romanticize it too much. And in a certain way, we haven't realized it yet. You know, we still think, perhaps we're just ideologically incapable of of thinking that of thinking the world that we're entering. Um, and and I guess that that ineffability, that indescribability, is what I find really interesting about conversations about the internet. So thank you, and have a good night.